But who really built the mysterious Antikythera machine? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes alive and every video immerses you in the fate of those who have shaped the world. Today, let's venture off the coast of Greece into a shipwreck more than 2,000 years old, where an incredible object was discovered, a mechanism corroded by the sea, covered in rust, but of astonishing complexity, the Antikythera machine, an assembly of gears and astronomical calculations capable of predicting eclipses, tracking lunar cycles, and even announcing the Olympic Games. Such advanced precision that it would take more than a millennium to find such technology again in Europe. But then, who designed it? But before setting out on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a great journey. In 1901, off the Greek island of Antikythera, sponge divers discovered the wreck of an ancient ship. Among the objects brought up were corroded metal fragments, pieces of greenish bronze altered by centuries underwater. At first mistaken for mere debris, they revealed interlocking gears, toothed fragments, and engraved inscriptions. Upon analysis, researchers understood it was a unique mechanical device. Named the Antikythera machine, this discovery transformed the understanding of the history of science. Gradually studied, it emerged as an analog computer able to predict astronomical events, positions of the sun, the moon, and eclipses. Its sophistication was so astonishing that some doubted whether the Greeks could have invented such a mechanism. Research, however, confirmed its authenticity and antiquity, dating between the 2nd and 1st century before Christ. The existence of such a machine, long before medieval clockwork, reveals a world of scholars and craftsmen of exceptional proficiency. The finely cut gear teeth, likely handmade, testify to an unsuspected level of expertise among the Greeks. Before this discovery, it was believed that complex gear mechanics appeared only in the 14th century with great European clocks. The Antikythera wreck proved that the roots of this mechanics extended much further back into antiquity, capable of designing precise systems to represent celestial phenomena. This enigma has since fueled the curiosity of specialists and the general public, fascinated by the idea that other similar devices might have existed, now lost or submerged in the depths of the seas. To understand the significance of this machine, it must be placed in the world between 230 before Christ, a period of rivalry among powers. In China, the Han dynasty was developing administration, military, and sciences, and silk production fostered the growth of the Silk Road. In India, the Maurya dynasty gave way to the Sungas, ensuring the continuity of a refined civilization and flourishing trade. In Iran, the Parthian Empire defended its borders in an unstable region. In the West, the Roman Republic continued its expansion. After the Punic Wars against Carthage from 264 to 146, before Christ, it turned towards Greece and Asia Minor, intervening in the Hellenistic sphere. The kingdoms originating from Alexander the Great were still active. The Ptolemaic Egypt, under the Ptolemies, remained a major cultural center thanks to Alexandria and its library. Pergamon was a hub of arts and knowledge, while the Seleucids dominated a vast territory between the Mediterranean and Iran, weakened by revolts and Roman pressure. The political unity of Alexander's successors remained fragile. Trade exchanges intensified along the great land and sea routes, caravans carrying silks, spices, and precious stones, Indo-Greek zones linking India and the Mediterranean, circulation of ideas and goods. The Mediterranean world was connected by a dense maritime network. Shipments of grains, wine, oil, and slaves traveled from coast to coast, alongside luxury goods destined for the elites. Other routes brought incense and perfumes from Arabia, prized for sanctuaries and ceremonies. Rhodes, famous for its naval power, occupied a strategic place in this trade. It was on one of these ships, possibly coming from Asia Minor, that the future Antikythera machine was found, nestled among other valuable goods before the shipwreck. The sciences and techniques of the time were advanced. Euclid, around 300 before Christ, laid the foundations of Euclidean geometry, influencing the scholarly world until the Renaissance. Archimedes from 287 to 212. Before Christ, revolutionized mechanics with his work on levers, buoyancy, and the screw pump. Hipparchus of Nicaea, in the 2nd century before Christ, distinguished himself in astronomy, cartography, and trigonometry, seeking to define the position of the sun and moon with precision. Astronomy, a product of Babylonian and Greek tradition, was already producing reliable ephemerides and inspiring the creation of mechanical representations of the cosmos. The first celestial globes were a testament to technical skill, heralding the creation of complex instruments to predict astronomical phenomena. Beyond centers like Alexandria or Pergamon, political tensions influenced the diffusion of knowledge. The Punic Wars, from 264 to 146 before Christ, affirmed Rome's supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. In 146 before Christ, the conquest of Greece ended with the destruction of Corinth, marking Roman control over the Greek world. Between 146 and 35. Before Christ, Rome conducted many campaigns in Asia Minor and around the Aegean Sea, annexing or controlling territories. Roman elites, fascinated by Greek culture, drew upon art, science, and technology, making Greek cities centers of culture for an aristocracy in search of prestige. This period culminated with the confrontation between Julius Caesar, born around 100 before Christ and assassinated in 44 before Christ, and Pompey. A few decades earlier, Marius and Sulla had already vied for power, inaugurating a century of instability. Despite this troubled context, scholars and artists traveled to offer their services to patrons eager to distinguish themselves through culture. In this political and cultural ferment, the Antikythera mechanism appears as a typical product of Hellenistic ingenuity influenced by different scientific traditions. Its fragments reveal an assembly of gears related to the calculations of solar and lunar calendars and the prediction of eclipses. According to inscriptions, the dial indicated months, zodiac signs, and possibly information about major Pan-Hellenic sporting events. This object thus had a dual use: practical, for anticipating celestial phenomena useful for navigation and planning, and also symbolic, as a feat of craftsmanship designed to fascinate scholars and patrons. The ancient Mediterranean was already a crossroads of material, intellectual, and technical exchanges. Navigators possessed astronomical knowledge to find their way at sea, and there were the first rudimentary instruments designed to improve navigation. While direct evidence remains scarce, the Antikythera mechanism suggests the existence of other prototypes or auxiliary tools, lost to erosion and the fragility of bronze. One can imagine specialized workshops in Rhodes or Alexandria, designing devices capable of modeling the movement of celestial bodies. Rivalries between cities, the dispersion of sources, and the fall of kingdoms hindered the transmission of knowledge, complicating today's archaeological investigations. The Antikythera mechanism remains the most astonishing remnant of Greco-Roman antiquity. Unlike sophisticated military devices, it stands out for its peaceful purpose and degree of precision. It merges Babylonian astronomy, based on centuries of celestial observations, and Greek geometry, seeking to mathematically represent these movements. Its gears reflected astronomical cycles like the Saros cycle, about 18 years and 11 days, allowing for the prediction of eclipses. By coordinating several wheels, the machine modeled the moon and the sun, anticipating their phases and alignments. The wonder must have been great for contemporaries unaccustomed to handling such elaborate mechanisms for astronomical purposes. Between 230 before Christ, the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world was undergoing profound changes. Workshops capable of producing advanced mechanics were rare and often supported by patrons or rulers passionate about science. In Alexandria, the museum and the library were privileged centers of research. Archimedes, a few decades earlier in Syracuse, had already designed remarkable machines, sometimes for defense. Babylonians and Egyptians had accumulated centuries of observations of the sky, essential to rulers for religious and administrative reasons. Concurrently, advancements in metallurgy related to weapons and agricultural tools paved the way for more ambitious projects, such as a celestial calculating machine. These advances formed the fertile ground for the emergence of the Antikythera mechanism. To understand the political tensions of the period, it is necessary to remember that wars could both stimulate and hinder the development of science. Rome, in full expansion, was subjugating vast territories. After Carthage and Greece, the Roman Senate asserted itself at the head of an empire with growing borders. Military campaigns mobilized resources and engineers for roads, aqueducts, and fortifications. At the same time, the aristocracy brought back libraries and captured scholars. Pompey, a rival of Caesar, exemplifies this tendency. After his campaigns in the East, he returned to Rome laden with artistic treasures. In this context, inventions and scientific objects held utilitarian value for war or administration, but also symbolic value within patrician circles enthusiastic about Greek culture and astronomy. In daily life, the literate classes used calendars to regulate religious festivals, ceremonies, and agricultural seasons. Each city had its civic time, and astronomers played a key role in harmonizing and correcting differences. In a rural world, marking the seasons and predicting eclipses had political and religious significance. A poorly interpreted eclipse could seem ominous, while announcing it enhanced the prestige of the ruler or his advisors. The Antikythera machine, representing celestial movements, could be presented at banquets to dazzle the assembly. Its presence on a merchant ship suggests it was destined for a notable or moved from a workshop or temple. Hypotheses differ, but all highlight the exceptional nature of the piece. When the ship capsized, around 70 to 60 before Christ, no one imagined it would carry one of the most fascinating mechanical objects in history. Discovered in 1901, its remains reveal only a part, with many components lost or damaged. The study of the fragments, however, shows a complex gear system. X-rays and virtual reconstructions have revealed a wheel with 223 teeth linked to the Saros cycle and the prediction of eclipses, as well as elements reflecting the dominant geocentric theory. Even following this model, the artifact proves that astronomers already had sufficient mathematical data to conceive a mechanism of remarkable precision. This achievement is part of the continuation of the conflicts of the time. The Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, concluded in 146 before Christ, had redistributed the balance of power in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, strong from this victory, turned towards the conquest of Greece, annexed Macedonia, and dominated the city-states. Between 146 and 30 before Christ, new struggles pitted Marius against Sulla, then Caesar against Pompey. After bloody campaigns and civil wars, the Republic transitioned towards the empire. Meanwhile, commerce thrived. The flow of goods and luxury items, possibly including the Antikythera machine, circulated throughout the Mediterranean basin. The Romans, eager for Greek knowledge, brought back philosophers and mathematicians, either as prisoners or voluntary teachers, to Rome. The great patrician families surrounded themselves with experts capable of writing treatises and presenting demonstrations based on mathematics and astronomy. Therefore, conflicts did not prevent the spread of knowledge, fueled by Roman curiosity for Greek exoticism. It is possible that the Antikythera mechanism was manufactured in a center of excellence, perhaps in Rhodes or Asia Minor, before being shipped to Rome or a temple. The maritime routes connecting the Aegean Sea to Italy were very busy. Ships departed for Delos or Italian ports, carrying luxury products, works of art, and mechanical curiosities. The trade also included statues, decorative panels, precious tableware, or elaborately crafted chests. In this context, a scientific relic like the Antikythera mechanism could only attract lovers of exoticism and intellectual prowess, keen to display culture and refinement. On a Mediterranean scale, the device testifies to the degree attained by Greek technicians and astronomers. While the Han dynasty consolidated its power in China with its grand projects and the rise of metallurgy, and India under the Sungas preserved the Maurya heritage, the Greek world transmitted scientific knowledge, of which the machine is an illustration. Everywhere, the observation of the stars occupied a central place. Astrology, confused with astronomy, had a sacred status. Predicting eclipses and interpreting celestial phenomena were essential to sovereigns. The trade routes, whether silk or Arabian caravan routes, also spread ideas. Even if the machine probably did not travel to the Far East, the principle of a celestial calculator could circulate in the form of translated and exchanged treatises. Discovered by chance at the beginning of the 20th century and dated to the decades surrounding the transition between the Republic and the Empire, the object is part of a global history. It recalls the interactions of antiquity when emissaries, merchants, and craftsmen crisscrossed lands and seas, conveying techniques and beliefs in unstable yet intellectually rich spaces. Despite the Punic Wars, Greek conquests, and Roman struggles, science advanced, driven by collective curiosity and the ambition of enlightened patrons. In this network of exchanges, the Antikythera mechanism, a synthesis of Greek mechanical genius and astral vision, heralded a revolution in understanding celestial movements. In the last decades of the 3rd century before Christ, Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great around 331, stood as a cultural and scientific beacon of the Hellenistic world. After his death, his empire fragmented into several kingdoms, including the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt. Under these Macedonian-descended rulers, Alexandria became the main hub of Greek knowledge, attracting scholars from throughout the Mediterranean basin. A cosmopolitan city, Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic were spoken there. Commercial and intellectual exchanges were favored by its strategic position near the mouth of the Nile, offering direct access to the eastern Mediterranean and the riches of Africa, Arabia, and, more indirectly, Asia. Under the Ptolemaic dynasty, Ptolemy I Soter and his successors, Ptolemy II Philadelphus and Ptolemy III Euergetes, dedicated considerable resources to the arts and sciences. The museum, or Mouseion, played a major role. It was not a modern museum, but a large institution bringing together scholars to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, cartography, botany, and literature. Closely associated with the Library of Alexandria, it amassed thousands of papyrus scrolls collected from all over the Mediterranean world. The Ptolemies encouraged the acquisition of works in all disciplines, from Greek poetry to Babylonian medical treatises or ethnographic studies on India. The library quickly became the repository of knowledge accumulated over several centuries. Librarians such as Zenodotus, Callimachus, or Eratosthenes organized, classified, and corrected texts, producing critical work that would have a lasting impact on the transmission of Greek culture and future scientific research. There were also mechanikoi, or engineers, combining mathematics, geometry, metallurgy, hydraulics, and astronomy. They designed complex devices to meet military, agronomic, or civil needs, as well as leisure machines for the elites. The mechanikoi, associated with the museum or supported by the royal power, benefit from a particularly favorable environment. The Ptolemaic kings financed large projects to enhance the renown of their kingdom. Many scholars reside in Alexandria, taking advantage of the resources of the library where Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic texts, or those translated from Babylonian, are preserved. The royal archives, craftsmen's workshops, shipyards, and forges feed the work of inventors. Ptolemaic patrons, imitated elsewhere, love to display automata producing spectacular effects during public or private ceremonies. The intellectual climate of this era forms an ideal breeding ground for figures like Archimedes, circa 287-212 before Christ, Hipparchus of Nicaea, circa 190-120 before Christ, and Ctesibius, active circa 285-222 before Christ. Each embodies a major aspect of the knowledge of the Hellenistic period. Archimedes, born in Syracuse but trained in Alexandria, composes advanced treatises on areas and volumes, hydrostatics, and mechanics. He designs the Archimedes screw, a helical pump allowing the lifting of water for irrigation or the draining of bilges. He is also interested in catoptrics and, according to ancient accounts, imagines defensive devices to protect Syracuse, such as mirrors setting enemy sails on fire or iron hands lifting boats. Hipparchus of Nicaea, an astronomer and mathematician of the 2nd century before Christ, is associated with the scientific influence of Alexandria. His works, later transmitted by Claudius Ptolemy, concern the observation and modeling of the sky, star catalogs, planetary calculations, and the foundations of trigonometry. He attempts to measure the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon by which the Earth's axis slowly shifts, and develops precise methods for predicting eclipses, durably influencing the making of astronomical instruments. Ctesibius, considered the founder of Alexandrian mechanics, studies the pressure of air and water. He develops air pumps propelling water under pressure and perfects diving bells. His water clocks, or clepsydrae, incorporate a regulation device making time measurement more reliable. His taste for precision is reflected in the care given to gears, cogwheels, and mechanisms that ancient artisans must master. This scientific effervescence relies on 3 supports: the royal court, which asserts its power through culture, the library, a reservoir of written knowledge, and the royal or private workshops set up near the palace. Here, bronze is melted, iron is forged, and devices illustrating theoretical principles are assembled under the supervision of the mechanikoi. The sovereigns, attracted by the prestige of refined objects, encourage the production of regulators, rudimentary programmable mechanisms, and automata capable of singing, releasing wine, or moving thanks to air compression, fascinating contemporaries with a blend of art and engineering. The role of these workshops does not stop at the Egyptian borders. The wars of succession after Alexander's death, the alliances and rivalries between kingdoms, Ptolemies in Egypt, Seleucids in the Near East, Antigonids in Macedonia, lead to a significant circulation of diplomats, artisans, and scholars. Maritime trade in the Mediterranean develops via the Aegean Sea and routes linking Levantine ports to those of mainland Greece or Asia Minor. The techniques developed in Alexandria reach Rhodes, Pergamon, and Antioch, major urban and political centers that seek to equip themselves with scientific institutions and infrastructures. Rhodes, a Greek island at the southeastern edge of the Aegean Sea, is recognized for its naval power and thriving commerce. As early as the 3rd century before Christ, it has its own school of philosophy and astronomy, supported by local elites enriched by trade. Navigation techniques encourage Rhodian astronomers to perfect instruments for calculation and celestial observation. Disciples of Hipparchus settle there to refine measurements of the positions of the moon and planets. Artisans trained in Alexandria or who have studied Egyptian mechanical treatises join Rhodes to establish small workshops where primitive astrolabes, portable sundials, and engines automating certain naval or port tasks are manufactured. Pergamon, in what is now western Turkey, intellectually rivaled Alexandria, starting from the reign of Eumenes II, from 197 to 159 before Christ, and Attalus II from 159 to 138 before Christ. Perched on an acropolis and endowed with a prestigious library, it became a hub of active patronage. The kings encouraged sculptors and engineers to erect spectacular monuments like the altar of Zeus and its gigantomachy frieze. In this climate, the practice of mechanikoi flourished. Bronze smiths and artisans drew inspiration from Alexandrian concepts to create fountains with controlled flow, automatic temple doors, and instruments showcasing the precision of astronomical calculations during symposia. Antioch, founded by Seleucus I Nicator around 300 before Christ, the capital of the Seleucids, took advantage of its position on the Orontes to trade with Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the eastern Mediterranean. Caravans and ships transported goods and technologies there. Local patrons invited Alexandrian or Rhodian engineers to settle in the city, often merchant sponsors seeking to improve their equipment or possess ingenious machines. The influence of Alexandria was felt through copies of the writings of Archimedes, Ctesibius, Hipparchus, and other scholars, contributing to the emergence of workshops where skilled technicians and natural philosophers trained in the theories of Aristotle or Straton of Lampsacus worked. Simultaneously, the notion of mechanikoi gradually became codified. In the Greek tradition, this term referred to both military engineers constructing catapults, battering rams, siege towers, and other war machines, and mechanics focusing on theoretical or experimental applications such as gear systems to measure time, reproduce lunar phases, or simulate sidereal movements. The line between practical astronomy for navigation or agriculture and speculative research related to ephemerides remained thin. Patrons, kings, or wealthy merchants were equally enthusiastic about military inventions and ceremonial automata. These mechanical knowledge interacted with philosophy. In Alexandria, scholars associated with Stoicism or Aristotelianism sometimes held chairs at the museum or received subsidies. The creation of gears to represent the cosmos extended the worldview of the philosophical schools. The Stoics saw the universe as an ordered organism, the logos. Aristotelians questioned celestial movement and the unmoved first mover. Engineers, more pragmatic, sought to perfect their devices' precision. Contacts were strengthened through the diplomatic and cultural relations of the Hellenistic sovereigns. A king could offer an unprecedented mechanical device to another sovereign to highlight the prestige of his reign. Wealthy Roman families also took an interest in these wonders, acquiring treasures of Greek art and science. In the 1st century before Christ, Alexandria remained the reference for advanced research, despite the increasing influence of Rome. The mechanical tradition of Alexandria was not limited to gears or hydraulic clocks. Under the Ptolemies, massive infrastructure projects were constructed, such as the Lighthouse of Alexandria on the island of Pharos, during the reign of Ptolemy II. This tall tower of marble and granite, equipped with bronze mirrors reflecting light to guide ships, illustrated the use of cutting-edge techniques for maritime safety, and emphasized the city's role as a trade hub in the Mediterranean. Alexandrian engineers, in direct contact with the royal court, enjoyed a constant interest in their innovations. Ptolemaic banquets sometimes included spectacular demonstrations, bronze figures animated by a hydraulic mechanism, automated wine service, or changing sets operated by pulleys. These festivities impressed foreign guests and fueled the desire to buy or imitate this expertise, enhancing the recognition of Alexandrian craftsmen throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The quality and availability of materials were crucial. The metallurgy of bronze and alloy of copper and tin had been refined over centuries, but the precise work of gears required even finer mastery. In Alexandria, the demand from the court and merchants allowed craftsmen to specialize in delicate parts for time measurement systems or automata. Some mechanikoi combined bronze with iron or hard wood to create complex joints. Advanced furnaces controlled the temperature, ensuring a homogeneous casting and a regular mechanism with an almost negligible margin of error. This tradition propagated a method: observation of the heavens and geometry on one side, practical experimentation on the other. Hipparchus's theories for calculating lunar movements and establishing eclipse tables translated into observation instruments, armillary spheres, parallactic rings, diopters, or astrolabes. Ctesibios demonstrated that the regularity of eclipsidra could faithfully reflect the passage of time through a minimal regulation system, giving rise to devices akin to precision mechanics. Over time, these techniques spread throughout the Hellenistic space. A patron from Rhodes could order a defensive system from engineers trained in Alexandria. A king of Pergamum had an automaton celebrating Zeus, or his dynasty manufactured, combining Egyptian principles with local aesthetics. In Antioch, merchants financed prototypes, facilitating the transshipment of goods or the calculation of favorable dates for navigation. Workshops of mechanikoi could thus settle near ports or on the city heights. These developments combined with the pure mathematics inherited from the Babylonians and Greeks. Mesopotamian tablets contained astronomical calculations over long periods. In Alexandria, this data intersected with Euclidean geometry. Euclid, active around 300 before Christ, composed the elements, establishing the foundations of deductive geometry. Hipparchus's trigonometry served to describe celestial arcs and formulate spherical equations. In this context, manipulating gears to represent cycles became the logical extension of an approach combining mathematical modeling and concrete experimentation. The Ptolemaic crown sought to elevate Egypt's reputation. The kings organized literary and scientific contests in Alexandria, invited renowned scholars to leave Athens or other Greek cities to join the museum, and reproduced and documented the inventions of Archimedes or Ctesibios. Under Ptolemy IV Philopator, reigned 221-204, before Christi, royal policy mixed military and fiscal management while maintaining a budget for the library and the reception of foreign researchers. Later, under Ptolemy VI and Philometor, reigned 180-45. Before Christi, Roman pressure increased, but Alexandria remained a crossroads of knowledge where engineers and mathematicians from various countries met. Greek, Syrian, Egyptian, and sometimes Jewish artisans worked in an environment stimulating inventiveness. With the Roman takeover of the Eastern Mediterranean, some royal workshops closed or changed function, while others served the new masters, Roman magistrates, and provisional governors. The legacy of the museum's scholars remained, and the technicians trained in Alexandria passed on their skills. Sponsors diversified. Wealthy Italian families requested these mechanics to embellish their residences or show off their cultural refinement. Inventions from Alexandria thus found their way into Roman villas. Treatises circulated to reproduce devices inspired by Nilotic or Aeolian prototypes, confirming the influence of late Hellenistic engineering on the Mediterranean basin. At that time, experimental science was not yet formalized. Astrology, astronomy, mathematics, and mechanics overlapped. In Alexandria, they studied both the position of the stars for predictions and mechanics to design lifting solutions. The mechanikoi could test, fail, perfect, and disseminate refined instruments. The glory of Archimedes in Syracuse or of Hipparchus with his astronomical tables motivated scholars to extend their work. Some, overlooked, developed essential elements for reliable clocks and complex automata. The Alexandrian tradition allowed for mastery over circularity, knowledge of celestial cycles, the design of gears with varied steps, primitive differentials, and systems with concentric axes. Each mechanical improvement resulted from encounters between geometers and craftsmen attentive to machining. The synergy created an open-air laboratory where patrons invested for prestige, efficiency, or military superiority. The Lygidian kings valued these advancements as proof that Ptolemaic Egypt equaled and surpassed continental Greece, offering a model of civilization where scientific progress was at its peak. Alexandria became the essential stop for accessing the latest breakthroughs in astronomy and applied mechanics. The city combined Babylonian and Egyptian legacies, contributions from the Greeks, Euclidean mathematical rigor, ancient technical pragmatism, and the ambition of sponsors. The mechanikoi benefited from this abundance, from irrigation through Archimedes' screw to Ctesibios' water clocks and Hipparchus' celestial tables. A network of expertise circulated between Alexandria, Rhodes, Pergamon, and Antioch, laying the foundation for ingenuity that would long influence future generations. The desire to disseminate this knowledge was evident in the copying and translation of works. Even though reproducing scrolls and parchments remained costly, abbreviated or commented versions of mechanical treatises left the library to enrich the private collections of other capitals. Diplomats and travelers, often tied to trade missions, returned with technical documents bought at a high price to deposit in distant libraries. The movement of ships on the Mediterranean transported not only wine, precious stones, or grains, but also diagrams, assembly instructions, and prototypes intended to be adapted elsewhere. Meanwhile, the work of master craftsmen, who initiated their apprentices into the secrets of metallurgy and gears, ensured a partial but sustained dissemination of these techniques. In Alexandria, in the 2nd century before Christ, a complete ecosystem developed for applied research, experimentation, and informal teaching of mechanics. The mechanikoi worked and taught there, ensuring considerable influence for their discoveries and preparing, through the circulation of knowledge, the rise of other cities wishing to rival the Egyptian intellectual center's influence. This mechanical tradition was part of a broader context of mathematics and natural sciences, nourishing a lasting heritage in the port cities of the Eastern Mediterranean. Rhodes, in the Aegean Sea, occupied a strategic position between continental Greece, Asia Minor, and the East since ancient times. Thanks to this location, the island became a prosperous city-state and a crossroads for navigators, merchants, and scholars, connecting the Aegean to the Levant, Egypt, and Phoenicia. This situation fostered the emergence of a remarkable scientific and naval tradition. As early as the 4th century before Christ, Rhodes established itself as a center of navigation, astronomy, and bronze object production, making it a recognized naval and scientific capital throughout the Mediterranean basin. In the 3rd and 2nd centuries before Christ, Rhodes built a powerful commercial and military fleet, supported by shipyards renowned for the quality of their vessels. The mastery of naval architecture was accompanied by the application of knowledge in hydraulics, geometry, and mechanics. There were ships like triremes and quadriremes, capable of maneuvering with agility in battle. The city trained generations of pilots, officers, and captains renowned in the Hellenistic world for their sense of direction, knowledge of winds, and astronomical observation skills. The Rhodian experience contributed significantly to the development of the science of navigation, requiring the following of stars, currents, and weather for sometimes dangerous crossings. The tradition of practical astronomy in Rhodes relied on sky observation. Navigators used the position of the sun by day and constellations by night. The moon served to determine departure at sea and anticipate tides, useful for extended maritime trade. Rhodian astronomers, specialists in celestial geometry, wrote treatises to provide captains with data on the position of the sun, moon, and stars at different times of the year. In Rhodes, observing the sky was accompanied by studies on planetary movements and the celestial sphere. Stoic and peripatetic philosophers sought to understand the cosmic order and the harmonious relationship between the laws of nature and humanity. The Stoics, from a school founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium towards the end of the 4th century before Christ, emphasized universal reason and a coherent logos governing nature. The Peripatetics, heirs of Aristotle, who died in 322 before Christ, prioritized observation, experimentation, and logical analysis to explain physical and celestial phenomena. The two schools coexisted in Rhodes's amphitheaters and libraries, creating a stimulating environment where mathematics, philosophy, and natural sciences intermixed. These teachings also had a military purpose. The island developed siege machines, catapults, and other defensive devices to defend itself in a context of Hellenistic rivalries. Rhodes' resistance against Demetrius Poliorcetes in 305 to 304 before Christ already demonstrated the importance of mechanics and engineering. In the 2nd century before Christ, with the influence of Archimedes, who died in 212 before Christ, engineers from Alexandria and Pergamon, Rhodes deepened the study of levers, gears, and hydraulic systems, essential for navigation, artillery, and urban pumps. The activity of blacksmiths and bronze workers reinforced the island's reputation. Bronze was used to make complex mechanisms, automatons, astrolabes, and planetariums, not just statues. Rhodian foundries produced technically refined pieces, and the artisans mastered casting, polishing, fitting, and gear ratios. This expertise was found in instruments for scholarly demonstrations or everyday use, like highly accurate sundials or water clocks. Automatons capable of repetitive or programmed movements were particularly prized. Singing birds, animated figures, or devices representing mythological scenes driven by springs or counterweights. For some, these automatons illustrated the cosmic order, mimicking the movement of living beings from gears, showed rationality at the heart of nature. They also served as educational tools, demonstrating principles of physics, balance, and dynamics. Some wealthy Rhodes families showcased these creations, attracting the admiration of travelers and scholars from across the Mediterranean. Astrolabes were used to measure the position of stars and facilitate astronomical observation. Stemming from a partially Babylonian tradition adopted by the Greeks, these graduated discs allowed people to identify the height of stars or the sun and estimate the time or latitude. Rhodian artisans, trained in Alexandrian knowledge, improved their precision by carving finer markers and adjusting axes to reduce play between components. In a context of increasing navigation, sailors could thus calculate their position with relative accuracy compared to methods based solely on naked-eye observation. Planetaria replicated the movements of celestial bodies visible to the naked eye. These devices, a sort of rudimentary orrery, linked spheres or rings representing the moon, the sun, and the planets known at the time: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Their aim was to model the revolution of the stars around the Earth according to the geocentric model. Bronze artisans, in collaboration with astronomers and philosophers, designed gears that replicated the relative speed of each celestial body, allowing the prediction of future positions and certain phenomena like conjunctions or lunar eclipses. The rise of Rhodian workshops was part of a Hellenistic intellectual network. Alexandria in Egypt, with its library and its museum, gathered scholars like Eratosthenes, around 276-194 before Christ, or Callimachus, working on geography, literature, and astronomy. Pergamon in Anatolia also had a renowned library and mechanical workshops. Rhodes benefited from these exchanges, importing techniques, ideas, and manuscripts. Artisans and engineers trained elsewhere settled on the island, while Rhodian scholars traveled to attend lectures or demonstrations in other royal courts. The city was thus at the heart of a dynamic network, stimulating innovation and artisan refinement. The naval prosperity of Rhodes had significant economic repercussions. The island taxed goods passing through its port, including grains, oils, and wines from the Aegean basin, redistributed towards the east. The bronze work was becoming professionalized within guilds funded by merchants and patrons. This dynamic favored the creation of new astronomical mechanisms ordered by dignitaries admiring the movement of the stars. Rhodian elites considered these objects as prestige symbols, reflecting mastery over time and the cosmos. In parallel with shipbuilding and maintenance, investments were made in the manufacture of automatons, astrolabes, and planetariums, consolidating Rhodes' status as a center of innovation and craftsmanship. During the last third of the 1st century before Christ, the Aegean Sea was at the crossroads of maritime routes connecting Asia Minor, mainland Greece, and the Italian peninsula. Massive merchant ships transported valuable goods for wealthy clients. One of them, the Antikythera wreck, dated around 70-60 before Christ, might have sailed from the coasts of Asia Minor to Rome after a probable stop at Delos. It sank near the island of Antikythera, southeast of the Peloponnese and northwest of Crete, due to a storm, a navigation error, or violent winds. The wreck remained submerged for almost 2 millennia until its discovery in the early 20th century. The ship, 50 meters deep, is a testament to advanced naval construction. The hull, with nailed freeboard, reinforced by massive wooden frames and sturdy planking, ensured stability and load capacity. The planks, made of oak or pine, coated with pitch, resisted the waves. Rivets and wood fragments analyzed indicate high-quality carpentry. Marine concretions preserve metallic elements, bronze staples and nails, revealing the assembly method. This architecture allowed long-haul voyages to major ports in the eastern Mediterranean and, possibly, to the Italian shores. The cargo is exceptional. Bronze and marble statues with expressive faces and finely sculpted draperies, glassware, refined jewelry, and coins bearing the effigies of Hellenistic sovereigns or Roman magistrates. The coins provide a valuable chronological benchmark, confirming that the shipwreck could not have occurred before the mid-1st century before Christ. Pieces of modest pottery reveal daily life on board, while jars for water or oil highlight the importance of provisions for a long crossing. The itinerary remains hypothetical but coherent. Departure from a coastal city in Asia Minor, perhaps Pergamon, heading towards the Cyclades, stopover at Delos, a commercial and banking center. Then, the ship rounded the southern Peloponnese to reach the channel between Crete and Antikythera. This fast route exposed it to strong currents and steep underwater terrain. The crew hoped to reach the Ionian Sea and then Italy. The cargo was meant to adorn patrician residences, be displayed during a triumph, or elevate the prestige of a magistrate eager for Hellenic symbols. It was not until 1900 that a fortuitous event changed the destiny of the buried relics. Sponge fishermen from the island of Simi or Kalymnos were navigating in small boats. The eastern Mediterranean was then the main harvesting area. The divers, equipped with rudimentary suits, heavy brass helmets, and a very basic air supply system, were engaged in one of the most perilous professions of the early century. On April 4th, 1900, while a diver was checking for sponges near the Antikythera coast, he spotted strange shapes, statues, bronze fragments, and various objects he could not identify. Intrigued, he resurfaced and alerted his companions. Thus, the first fragment of the Antikythera wreck was revealed to the modern world. The Greek archaeological community then prepared to evaluate these remains. The fishermen quickly informed local authorities. The Greek government dispatched official representatives and military personnel under the supervision of Commander Dimitrios Kondos, an officer of the Hellenic Navy. In 1901, a more structured expedition used still nascent diving suits. The underwater pressure, the difficulty of moving heavy and fragile objects, and the absence of communication equipment made each dive perilous. Despite this, the divers recovered statues, luxury objects, and bronze pieces whose value was still unknown. Diving to such depths poses a huge risk. Divers must manage the pressure and duration of their dives to avoid caisson disease, now known as decompression sickness. Due to the lack of medical knowledge and appropriate equipment, ascending too quickly causes nitrogen bubbles in the blood. Diver Georgos Kritikos surfaces too quickly after a prolonged immersion. His pain and progressive paralysis lead to his death, making him one of the first victims of decompression in the history of underwater archaeology. This tragedy deeply affects the crew and Commander Kondos, who must contend with this ongoing danger. Managing decompression stops remains challenging with the equipment of the time. Each dive is a test of courage and endurance. Kritikos' death underscores the precariousness of the methods used, but also the vital importance of rescuing submerged treasures. Everyone knows that the objects left at the bottom would continue to deteriorate. The operation progresses despite setbacks and marks one of the first major underwater archaeology projects to receive notable institutional support. The research initially focuses on locating the largest fragments, particularly the bronze and marble statues. Sailors and divers create a progressive inventory of everything that emerges from the sediments. Under Kondos' direction, surveys estimate the arrangement of blocks and artifacts, even though the methodology remains rudimentary. Several statuary pieces are uncovered, partially dislocated torsos, finely crafted busts, and heads with precise features. Despite the time spent underwater, some sculptures retain readable surfaces. as the bronze covered with a green patina resists corrosion in a low-oxygen environment. Restorers clean and stabilize these relics, which cause a great stir when displayed at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. The wreck also yields structural elements, segments of planks, nails, and bolts still embedded in concretions, as well as some pieces of broken ceramic tableware. Divers sometimes bring up clusters, mixing pottery fragments and organic deposits. On deck, archaeologists and officers identify the objects, patiently cleaned with fresh water and a brush, then cataloged and photographed. The Greek Navy coordinates the logistics, ensuring the security and preservation of the artifacts. Among the discoveries are also luxury glassware, sometimes almost intact, with an iridescent sheen due to the saltwater. These utensils confirm that a Roman or Greek elite was the intended recipient of these goods, as well as small adornments and pigment residues. Altogether, the statues, glassware, and jewelry quickly attract the attention of international scholars. In 1901, operations accelerate following the first dive in 1900. Driven by condos and with the support of Greek authorities, the recovery follows a methodical plan. Ropes and hoists slowly lift the largest blocks. Each maneuver requires a collective effort to avoid damaging the sculptures. Divers also report small bronze pieces, among which are the corroded fragments of the future antiquity analog computer. At that time, no one suspects the sophistication of these gears, covered with algae and concretions, but their circular teeth already intrigue the first examiners. Attempts are made to understand the reasons for the shipwreck at Antikythera. The area is subject to fierce winds, especially during seasonal changes. The very uneven seabed, with areas of steep fault, could trap a ship seeking temporary anchorage. The most common theory suggests a storm drove the vessel onto the rocks. Deprived of maneuverability, the crew could not avoid running aground, possibly followed by dismasting or a breach in the hull. The sailors may have abandoned the cargo to save their lives, but the ship sank too quickly, trapping the fortune it contained. The underwater operation required collaboration between the Royal Greek Navy and sponge fishermen experienced in diving. At the time, diving equipment was expensive and unsafe, financed only by the state or wealthy entrepreneurs. The swift recovery of entire artifacts encountered health constraints. The pressure at several dozen meters below the surface and the limited knowledge of decompression stops made each outing risky. Despite the tragic accident of Kritikos, the authorities could not miss the opportunity to recover a major archaeological site for ancient commerce and Hellenistic art. Commander Kondos, military chief and coordinator, rationalized diving times, limited prolonged stays at the bottom, and ensured that the pieces were transported intact to shore. The statues were transported to the surface and then to Athens, where experts inspected them. Sailors ensured the stability of the heavy objects in the hold. The newspapers in Athens regularly reported on the progress of the excavations, arousing curiosity throughout Europe. Each shipment provided new clues about the original cargo. The amphorae provided information about consumption products, wine or oil, sources of stable income, while art objects played a speculative role. Fragments of fine ceramics, probably for ceremonial use, showed the influence of Oriental workshops such as Rhodes or Pergamon. The ship combined the transport of prestigious works and the trade of common goods, ensuring profitability despite the uncertainties of the journey. Over the days, the team located other objects scattered over a wider area. Currents, or the disintegration of the ship, had moved some fragments. The divers also brought up elements of the keel or planks, attesting to the size of the hull. The accumulations of sediments around the metal pieces sometimes formed concreted blocks that had to be sawn or broken to extract the remains. The excavation oscillated between marvel, finely chiseled marbles or bronze faces, and concern about the extraction methods. Underwater techniques remained exploratory, and the first archaeologists groped to lay the foundations of a modern discipline. The shockwave caused by this finding resonated internationally. European experts, especially French and British, followed the recovery's progress, aware that the Aegean Sea had already been the cradle of masterpieces of Greek sculpture, such as the kouros, or Cycladic figures. Antikythera, then little known, suddenly became a focal point of scholarly discussions. Some newspapers mentioned an underwater treasure worthy of Alexandria. Official reporters focused on the inventories of objects, site measurements, and lifting techniques. No one imagined at this stage that one of the circular fragments could constitute an unprecedented astronomical mechanism. In the hierarchy of discoveries, statues and jewelry immediately caught the eye, while corroded bronzes were relegated to the background. At the end of the 1900-1901 operations, the majority of accessible pieces were extracted. The wreck was not fully excavated, as the depths, the complexity of the site, and limited equipment prevented exhuming all objects. The pieces brought up, transported to Athens, became the pride of the National Archaeological Museum. Various expert commissions, conservators, art historians, and archaeologists began their study. Commander Dimitrios Kondos received praise from the Greek press for his courage and perseverance, regularly communicating his observations and findings. The tragedy of Georgos Kritikos reminded everyone of the price paid to wrest these treasures from the sea, but it did not curb curiosity and enthusiasm. Small teams continued to recover other elements in the following years. This wreck, although lightened, still holds secrets. Modern dives, more methodical and equipped with sophisticated devices, will allow the inventory to be completed decades later. Archaeologists of the early 20th century could hardly imagine the historical magnitude of Antikythera and focused on the statues, sometimes reproductions or original creations from the late Hellenistic period. These treasures aroused a wave of national pride for Greece, which was then redefining its cultural identity. For the ancient Romans, the ship represented a tool of prestige, a bridge between East and West, providing the Italian aristocracy with objects of extreme refinement. For 20th century Greece, the wreck became a window to its past greatness and the artistic and scientific influence of the Mediterranean antiquity. Commander Kondos played a central role in coordinating the rescues and recognizing the importance of these discoveries. Without his tenacity, a large part of the sculptures could have been plundered, abandoned, or damaged. He had to juggle between official directives, diver safety, and scientific curiosity, all while precisely documenting the location of each object brought up, a novel approach for the time. Ironically, the fragmented bronze pieces, future elements of the Antikythera mechanism, did not attract attention until the early 20th century. In popular consciousness, the wreck was first associated with its majestic bronze and marble statues, before the importance of the gears was understood. When the ships of the Hellenic Navy and their divers anchored again in 1901 to complete the last excavations, most of the easily accessible treasure had already been transferred to Athens. The rare subsequent attempts focused mainly on the area where the majority of artifacts had been extracted. The highly valuable pieces had already been transported to Piraeus or the Athenian docks. The name of Antikythera began resonating in scholarly circles, attracting the interest of foreign researchers keen on future studies. The objects brought up, displayed or stored, have not yet unveiled all their secrets. Researchers analyze inscriptions, seals, artist signatures, and political dedications to detail the itinerary or destination of these pieces. The Greek government, proud of this venture, understands the importance of underwater archaeology to preserve its heritage. The tragic disappearance of Georgos Kritikos, the boldness of the divers, and the dedication of Commander Kondos deeply imprint the stories of this adventure. The submerged ruins remain partly unexplored, still hiding fragments essential to the complete reconstruction of the merchant ship's history, which departed from Asia Minor and never reached the coveted Roman port. In 1902, while studying the objects extracted from the Antikythera wreck, Greek archaeologist Valerios Stais, curator at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, noticed a detail that upended the certainties about mechanical knowledge in antiquity. Among several fragments of bronze, he discovered a small gear wheel embedded in an irregular piece. At first glance, it seemed almost anachronistic. No one imagined that a precise mechanism, relying on complex gears, could have existed in the Greco-Roman world 2,000 years ago. This gear wheel, with regular teeth, testified to an extremely advanced know-how, reminiscent of a pre-clockwork device. The archaeological context of Greece at the turn of the 20th century helps to situate Stais's approach. Since Greek independence gained in 1830, excavations had multiplied at sites like Olympia or Delphi, often with international archaeologists. The museums in Athens sought to organize and present the objects discovered around the Aegean Sea. Valerios Stais, a doctor by training and passionate about archaeology, devoted himself to studying the Antikythera finds, retrieved by sponge fishermen in 1900 and 1901. When he isolated the gear wheel in 1902, he realized he held an enigma. How could such a component, reminiscent of a clockwork mechanism, have ended up on a shipwreck that sank around 70–60 before Christ? The question of its original function immediately arises. Stais attempts to mentally assemble the corroded pieces, often broken into multiple fragments and covered with concretions, making the observation of engravings or inscriptions difficult. In his makeshift laboratory, he takes notes, sketches the irregular edges, and uses simple magnifying glasses to examine the teeth. The state of technology at the time prohibits penetrating X-rays. He must rely on visual observations, hypotheses, and comparisons with the rare known ancient mechanical achievements, as described by Greek engineers like Ctesibius or Philo of Byzantium. Very quickly, curiosity extends beyond the borders of Greece, and scholars from several countries hear about the mysterious ancient gear. However, Europe at the beginning of the 20th century is shaken by profound political and scientific changes. As international tensions rise and lead to World War I in 1914, archaeological research continues, often influenced by national imperatives. Spiridon Marinatos, born in 1901, grows up in a Greece marked by the reforms of the Belle Époque and the desire to promote the Hellenic legacy. A brilliant student, he specializes in archaeology and participates in numerous projects, notably in Crete. Although his name is mainly associated with the discoveries of Akrotiri on Santorini in the 1960s, he is already interested in all facets of Greek heritage, including the Antikythera fragments and the hypotheses of Valerios Stais, a mechanical puzzle that remains fascinating in certain erudite circles in Athens. During the interwar period, archaeology advances slowly. The National Archaeological Museum of Athens preserves the fragments, observed with interest by Greek and foreign scholars. The main difficulty remains reconstructing a partially missing object and presenting a coherent hypothesis. Some specialists see it as a navigation instrument like a primitive astrolabe, others as a mechanism related to astronomy, a field largely developed among the Greeks. Without X-ray means, detailed study of the mechanism remains limited, but the visible gears on some debris suggest sophisticated technology, excluding a simple hydraulic mechanism or sundial. World War II, from 1939 to 1945, and the German occupation of Greece strongly disrupt research. Museums operate at a slow pace, many cultural assets are safeguarded, and archaeological studies take a back seat. At the end of the conflict, an international wave of collaboration revitalizes investigations. It is then that Derek John de Solla Price, a British physicist and historian of science born in 1922, comes into the picture. After studying physics, he developed an interest in the history of mathematics and astronomy, an ideal profile to tackle the Antikythera mechanism at the crossroads of technology, astronomy, and history. In the mid-1950s, he begins to seriously study the documents and surveys of the fragments, making several trips to Greece to closely examine the museum's collection in Athens. At that time, X-ray radiography already exists, but remains limited and sometimes ill-suited for archaeological research. However, this technique becomes essential. By projecting rays onto the object and capturing their passage, it is hoped to distinguish internal structures, locate the gear teeth, delineate each cog, and identify axes, pivots, or engravings under the corrosion. The first attempts used military hospital equipment repurposed from its medical use and adjusted through trial and error. The results are mixed. Some circular shapes and straight lines appear, but the image remains blurry and does not allow a precise count of the teeth. The bronze alloy mixed with marine concretions and the fragmentation of the pieces complicate interpretation. Despite these obstacles, de Solla Price is convinced that the object represents the culmination of rare technological knowledge. He consults with mechanics specialists, historians of astronomy, and relies on his mathematical skills. The dating, based on the shipwreck around 7060 before Christ, and the engraved inscriptions, notably the months and zodiac signs, suggest that the device was used to represent or calculate celestial phenomena. Scholars consider it an ancient analog computer. Spiridon Marinatos, renowned for his excavations and later famous for his Akrotiri dig in the 1960s, encourages deeper research. He also intervenes in archaeological contextualization, being familiar with Cycladic culture and the topography of the Greek islands while questioning the transport ship. With restoration technicians, he stabilizes the fragments to prevent their degradation. Marinatos, de Solla Price, and museum specialists meticulously inventory each piece, noting the positions of the gears, the size of the teeth, and inscriptions. High margins of error remain. A fragment might contain a half-hidden gear or unreadable numbers, complicating accurate identification of the astronomical cycles represented. Particularly sensitive to the history of science, Derek de Solla Price accumulates notes, creates diagrams, and attempts graphic reconstructions of the Antikythera mechanism inspired by medieval clocks. Until then, it was considered that complex gear systems appeared mainly in the 14th century with escapement clocks. Analysis of the device shows that the Greeks of late Hellenistic times mastered very high precision engineering. De Solla Price publishes a comprehensive article with drawings and photographs, and by the late 1950s, His seminal work, Gears from the Greeks, appears in 1959, suggesting that ancient Greeks had designed gears and astronomical calculators of an unsuspected level. In Gears from the Greeks, he presents the discovery of the fragments, their initial observations, and his hypotheses on the internal structure of the machine. He details the main gears while acknowledging that the exact count of the teeth remains difficult. He suggests that one or more wheels reproduce the 19-year metonic cycle and that a more complex mechanism could track eclipses. The work arouses curiosity and enthusiasm, but technical limitations are notable. Contemporary radiography provides grainy images, where determining the exact number of teeth and linking the device to a specific astronomical cycle is uncertain. The large number of fragments complicates the task. An isolated gear might have 60 teeth, but its wheel, axis, and associated pinion must be identified. Partially erased inscriptions mentioning months or constellations do not always align with mechanical rotation. Some parts seem to be missing or are too fragmented to be assembled. Between 1950 and 1960, researchers hoped for higher resolution X-rays or other scanning methods to observe each tooth and the internal surfaces of the bronze. Despite these limitations, Gears from the Greeks anchors the idea that the Antikythera mechanism, sometimes called the computer of the ancients, is a sophisticated astronomical device, a unique testimony to the artisan scholars, mechanikoi, of the late Hellenistic period. De Sola Price mentions the earlier work of Valerios Thais and Spiridon Marinatos, whose archaeological support solidified the artifact's authenticity and dating. He also cites other Greek researchers who worked on the preservation of the bronze and data collection. The work is quickly translated and disseminated in international academic circles, increasing the notoriety of the discovery. But among the general public, the machine remains little known as museums prioritize classical sculptures over a damaged bronze block that is difficult to interpret. The publication of Gears from the Greeks in 1959 marks a decisive milestone. The idea of advanced Hellenistic engineering begins to take hold, despite the limitations of radiography techniques available in the mid-20th century. The first attempts at radiography date back to the 1930s and 1940s, with very low-resolution black and white images, unable to distinguish fine details of half a millimeter. However, understanding the Antikythera machine requires discerning the shape of each tooth and the possible presence of engravings or tiny angle divisions. A wheel seemingly equipped with 53 teeth might have 52 or 54, which changes the identification of the associated astronomical cycle. The imprecision also concerns the inscriptions engraved inside the casing or on the gears. X-ray photos sometimes show irregular contours, and an engraved line can be confused with a microfissure or a denser area of the metal. Despite this, De Sola Price undertakes comparative calculations. If one wheel has 223 teeth, it may correspond to the Saros cycle. If another has 127 teeth, it might indicate the Draconic month. Hypotheses multiply and contradict each other, but a theoretical reconstruction gradually emerges with a large circular dial, several internal wheels, and various graduations for the months or constellations. Technological constraints, however, prevent a definitive conclusion, creating a climate of excitement and cautious anticipation. Furthermore, museum and scientific support remains limited. The National Archaeological Museum of Athens, rich in ancient pieces, does not have imaging laboratories suited for delicate metal objects. Some fragments are sometimes sent abroad, but their fragile state makes any transport risky. The absence of stable conservation techniques raises fears of bronze oxidation or the alteration of inscriptions. Researchers, therefore, resign themselves to studying most pieces in situ with only a few low-quality radiographic images. This context explains why progress on the Antikythera mechanism is slow until the 1970s. The year 1959 serves as a symbolic marker. The publication of Gears from the Greeks coincides with a renewed interest in the history of science, stimulating new research perspectives. Derek de Solla Price provides a coherent analytical framework, even though many questions remain unanswered. He notably discusses the writings of Cicero, born in 106 before Christ and died in 43 before Christ, who mentioned a mechanical globe called the sphere of Archimedes. Price sees this as possibly confirming that this type of mechanism, designed to represent celestial movements, was not isolated. His investigation also draws on more obscure ancient texts, mentioning the Mechanikoi, Alexandrian or Rhodian engineers, reputed for designing automata and optical devices. In his interpretation, the Antikythera mechanism becomes the flagship of a cutting-edge scientific engineering, long ignored by modern historians. The period from 1902, when Valerios Stais discovered the gear wheel, to 1959, when Price's publication emerged, constitutes the gestation of a paradigm shift in the perception of ancient technology. Researchers, initially skeptical then convinced, admit they have before them the material echo of advanced astronomical and mechanical knowledge from the Hellenistic era. Spiridon Marinatos sees in it the continuation of a brilliant intellectual tradition in geometry and astronomy, whose technical application was poorly known. Valerios Stais can be considered the pioneer who first studied this mechanism despite limited means. Derek de Solla Price completes this phase of exploration by delivering a reasoned synthesis, the significance of which is not lost on historians and scientists. During these decades, the main scientific barrier remains the lack of sufficiently fine radiographs to reveal gears, inscriptions, and assembly subtleties. Attempts to count the teeth are thwarted by the state of corrosion, the layering, and the limited precision. Without computer modeling, virtual reconstruction is impossible. Artisanal models in wood or metal are used, based on more or less speculative hypotheses. If the reconstruction proves consistent with certain astronomical periodicities, it is considered acceptable. If not, the model is revised. Scientific journals sometimes publish contradictory reports, debates over the number of main gears, or the consideration of planetary retrogradations. Black and white photographs of the fragments allow only a partial approach to the three-dimensional reality. The period from 1902 to 1959 is characterized by a mix of wonder and frustrations. Researchers are fascinated by the existence of such an elaborate ancient device and hindered by technological limitations in studying it. The gear identified by Stais symbolizes the idea that within these corroded remains lies a hidden mechanism rivaling the clockwork principles of the late Middle Ages. The pioneering investigations by Marinatos and Price reinforce the belief that the Antikythera wreck holds an intellectual treasure capable of illuminating Hellenistic science. The publication in 1959 marks the official start of modern research on the mechanism. Despite the low resolution of the X-rays and uncertainties about the exact number of teeth, the general public and specialists become aware that it is a unique object bearing an unprecedented technical history. These analytical limitations only increase curiosity, and the international community now embraces this mystery. The case of the machine, made of solid bronze, measured about 34 centimeters in length, 18 centimeters in height, and 9 centimeters in width. It included several outer plates, fastened by rivets or pins, protecting a complex set of gears. Inscriptions in the Ionian alphabet guided the user in reading the dials and interpreting the astronomical cycles. The corroded appearance of the fragments bears witness to centuries of immersion in seawater, but the segments still legible reveal carefully incised lines and letters. At its core was a series of finely cut gears, each with a precise number of teeth. The main one, the gear with 223 teeth, was used to calculate the Saros cycle, which lasts about 18 years, to predict the repetition of solar and lunar eclipses. This gear, connected to other pinions, formed a miniature planetary mechanism, reproducing the movements of the moon and several planets. The lunar differential gear, the first known example, allowed the variation in the rotation speed of the moon to account for its elliptical orbit, according to Greek astronomy inherited from Babylonian traditions and Hipparchus's research. On the front face, a large circular dial was divided into degrees corresponding to the zodiac, and a second marker to the Egyptian calendar of 365 days used in the Hellenistic period. These two scales allowed the measurement of time according to the seasonal year and the fixed year. At the back, other dials calculated the metonic cycle of 19 years, the exoligmos of 54 years, to refine the prediction of eclipses, and mentioned 223 lunar phases corresponding to the Saros cycle. A final dial evoked the Pan-Hellenic Games, allowing the determination of the competition's occurrences in Olympia or Delphi. Although the exact arrangement of the pointers is not preserved, analyses propose a reconstruction with several overlapped indices on the dials. No original pointer has survived, with only the metallic axes or openings remaining. The movement of these indices, coupled with the rotation of the internal wheels, indicated celestial positions and dates, thus completing the didactic and astronomical function of this modest case, but of exceptional mechanical ingenuity. At the heart of the Antikythera machine, the architecture testifies to the convergence between Hellenistic artisanal technology and theoretical advances in astronomy. Designed according to a geocentric principle, the device focuses on the position of the moon and the sun in relation to the Earth. The artisan astronomers, without modern theories of gravitation, were already trying to account for the irregular speed of the moon, a phenomenon today associated with the eccentricity of its orbit. Hipparchus, born around 190 before Christ and died around 120 before Christ, proposed a method to model this apparent inequality integrated into the famous Hipparchian ellipse. The Hipparchian ellipse simulated the variation in distance between the moon and the Earth, causing a change in apparent speed. The ancient engineers conceived a gear capable of imitating this cyclic variation. The fragments of the device show a system of two nested pinions coupled with an eccentric bearing. Thus, the disk representing the moon did not turn at a constant speed, but received irregular impulses reflecting the changes in angle and position described by Hipparchus's theories. In the 2nd century before Christ, celestial mechanics relied on careful observations of the sky. Babylonian and Greek astronomers monitored the position of the moon, the sun, and reference stars to create position tables. They calculated the duration of the synodic month, 29-53 days, the anomalistic month, 27-55 days, and the draconic month, 27-21 days, essential for predicting eclipses. The inclusion of these periods in the Antikythera mechanism was essential. The synodic month allows tracking of the lunar phases and eclipse predictions. The anomalistic month accounts for the apparent slowing or speeding of the moon, depending on its position relative to perigee or apogee. And the draconic month, related to the inclination of the lunar orbit, allows for predicting eclipses when the moon crosses the plane of the ecliptic. To perform these calculations, the creators arranged the gears so as to add or subtract rotations. The gear system at the back of the device combined gears with 1 to 3 dozen teeth, articulated around axes connecting multiple levels of gears. Each wheel drove the next, according to a precise ratio. For example, 223 teeth for one, 53 for another, allowing for the tracking of lunar and solar periods. A gear would rotate another gear or move an index, synchronizing the displays on the dials. Ancient engineers mastered the transmission of motion with precision, using addition, differential, and demultiplication to achieve variable speeds from simple gear wheels. Some fragments suggest possible planetary retrogrades. To the naked eye, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn sometimes appear to move backward before resuming their forward motion. Hellenistic astronomers explain this phenomenon with a system of epicycles or nested spheres. The Antikythera mechanism provides few clues about a complete planetary module. A damaged segment might relate to these retrogrades, but scientific consensus is lacking. Some believe it included Venus or Mercury, others that it was limited to the moon, the sun, and eclipses. Inscriptions on the bronze plates suggest that at least one dial mentioned a planetary cycle, but the fragmentary text prevents knowing the exact number of planets represented. This controversy highlights the Hellenistic effort to integrate multiple astronomical models into a single mechanical system. It was about inscribing Hipparchus's theory of the moon, based on the variation of the orbital motion, and potentially that of Babylonian astronomy, with its planetary tables. The builders likely had access to Hipparchus's writings, and were inspired by the geometry of Apollonius of Perga and the nascent trigonometry. Greek engineering was fueled by constant exchanges between Alexandria, Rhodes, and Pergamum, fostering the sharing of methods for calculating lunations, calendar cycles, and planetary phases. This mechanical sophistication is evident in the internal structure of the casing, now corroded, but whose organization is discernible through radiography and scanning. The axes, sometimes made of hollowed bronze rods or tubular shafts, allowed the wheels to rotate into one another. To fix them, artisans used metal rivets or pins, hammered on their ends to hold the central axle in bronze plates, or platines assembled into a closed rectangular box. Pieces of metal serving as rings or bearings reinforced the whole. Friction and wear were crucial. A slight play allowed the bronze wheels not to seize up, and a coating of grease or vegetable oil, probably olive oil, limited the heating between the tooth surfaces. The Greeks distinguished between different types of oil. Properly filtered olive oil served as a lubricant for parts rotating at low speed. In some royal workshops or naval arsenals, animal fats mixed with wax were used, but for an object of this size, olive oil was more suitable, less pasty, and easier to apply. Cutting was precise but tolerant. Fine chisels, bronze burns, or small manual lathes made it possible to shape each wheel. Calculating the gear teeth required knowing the exact number of teeth to achieve the desired ratio. For example, a ratio of 223 to 53 required the large wheel to have 223 teeth and the pinion 53. Any error skewed the cycles, but a minimal tolerance was acceptable. Some teeth could wear or break, requiring maintenance or partial recasting. Considering the synodic, draconic, and anomalistic months shows the mechanism's level of coordination. Each period fits into a gear or series of wheels to add, subtract, or fraction distinct rotations. The synodic cycle, about 29.5 days, was interwoven with the solar year of 365 days, sometimes adjusted to the Egyptian or Greek lunisolar calendar. The draconic cycle adjusted to the synodic to indicate moon node alignments, a possible source of eclipses. Designers used a primary gear for the moon and a secondary gear to indicate its crossings with the sun's apparent path. The anomalistic period introduced a subtle variation. The moon, after passing perigee, took a different time than its synodic period to return, estimated around 27.55 days. Engineers had to introduce a differential mechanism capable of progressing at a speed slightly different from the standard synodic cycle. Recent hypotheses suggest the existence of a rethink wheel, a gear equipped with an offset pivot arm, associating two axes to reproduce this inequality. The rotation was not uniform. A skate slid on an inclined disc or an eccentric rail, creating an acceleration, then a deceleration according to the gear's position. The concept of an animated geocentric model was found in every piece of the puzzle. The Antikythera mechanism animated the presumed orbits of the sun and moon, according to the geometric laws of the time, modulated by subtle corrections. Hipparchus is widely credited with this mathematical model, describing the inequalities of lunar motion, later applied by artisans mastering gear systems. The result testified to a deep understanding of astronomical phenomena, eclipse cycles, and the care required in manufacturing. Addressing planetary retrogradations remains controversial. Some fragments mention planets or phases of Venus. Some researchers assume a small gear train to simulate the position of Venus and Mercury on a secondary dial, following a combined sidereal cycle with epicycles, while others think it was a didactic or astrological reminder with no dedicated mechanism. The moon was central as its cycle influenced tides, civic and religious calendars, and eclipses, while planets were an additional luxury in an already specialized device. The instrument's fabrication required calibrated bronze, generally copper mixed with tin, sometimes with a low percentage of lead or other metals. Casting accuracy and fitting required specialized workers, founders for the plates, goldsmiths or braziers for cutting the teeth, locksmiths, and mechanics for adjusting the axes and riveting the assembly. This craftsmanship was equivalent to that required for small hydraulic automata or siege engines. Skilled Greek artisans, mechanikoi, gained experience in Alexandria, Rhodes, or other scientific centers, and then executed orders for wealthy patrons. Once assembled, the machine had to display the 19-year cycle, Metonic cycle, the 223-month cycle, Saros cycle, or the duration of 54 years, Exeligmos cycle, to correct the drift of eclipses. In case of misalignment, part of the mechanism had to be dismantled and teeth or wheels corrected. Lubrication with olive oil had to be renewed regularly, sometimes with scented oils like lavender or rose to slow oxidation. It was through this meticulous work that designers made distinct lunar and solar cycles coincide in one device. Epigraphic inscriptions, deciphered in the early 21st century, describe the use of formulas to memorize the number of days between two main phases, or the number of months to elapse before a conjunction generating an eclipse. The operator had to position the dials according to the date, correct the calendar for intercalations, and ensure concordance between the civil and astronomical months. The astronomical theory combined Greek geometry and Babylonian observations. The Babylonians observed the moon and the planets over centuries, compiling an enormous series of figures to detect cycles. The Greek mathematicians used these patterns to create geometric models, epicycles, eccentrics, deferent circles. In the region of Rhodes, where the origin of the mechanism is suspected, the connection with the Stoic school and practical astronomy for navigation reinforced the need for a didactic instrument. Navigators could predict tides and certain celestial phenomena, while Stoics saw in the machine the universal harmony reflecting the cosmic order. The technical inspiration from Hipparchus is probable, but the precise date remains uncertain. The completion of the device is generally located in the second half of the 2nd century before Christ, or the beginning of the 1st century before Christ. An excellent workshop in Rhodes would have mobilized several scholars, mathematical boards, and funding from a patron or sponsor. The prototype was undoubtedly unique or very rare, with no series mentioned before Cicero. Ancient planetaria seemed rather simplified, without precise calculation of lunar periods. The internal movement was ensured by lubrication and manual adjustment. No ratchet or escapement gear system existed, unlike medieval clocks. The user turned a crank, driving the whole set of gears. The front dial indicated the sun's position in the zodiac and the state of the moon, while at the back, concentric dials showed long cycles, Meton, Saros, Exeligmos, and possibly other chronological markers such as the Pan-Hellenic games. The machine showed that Greek astronomy, inherited from the Babylonians and nourished by Hipparchus and Apollonius, was advanced enough to model complex orbital phenomena. Despite the absence of gravitation, it offered a mechanical model of a stable and ordered cosmic world. The inclusion of the Hipparchian ellipse through eccentric axes and differential gears remains one of the most remarkable points. The mechanics controlling variable speeds would only reappear in the 14th century with medieval astronomical clocks. The precision of the assembly reflects the high level of Aegean craftsmen, whose tradition was fueled by military and civilian discoveries, forging the metal at the right temperature, adjusting the central shafts, polishing the pieces to prevent snags or blockages, and marking indicators to guide the assembly required considerable expertise. The corrosion having erased most surfaces, it is assumed that these were finely polished and perhaps adorned with engravings or indicators invisible today. The use of olive oil, abundant throughout the Mediterranean basin, was essential in mechanics to lubricate each tooth before closing the case, preventing seizure. Once all the wheels were in place, the machine formed a microcosm where each gear determined the rotation of the others, reflecting the orbit of a star or the evolution of a time cycle. The Stoics saw in this engineering the concrete manifestation of a well-regulated universe. The moon played a pivotal role in agriculture, religion, and navigation. Its synodic, anomalistic, and draconic cycles allowed the setting of festivals, forecasting sowing or harvest, and anticipating eclipses, events perceived as omens. Oracles and soothsayers relied on these cycles to coordinate rites and celestial phenomena. The machine could thus have a practical use in scholarly or administrative circles. The integration of the Hipparchian ellipse was an achievement. A sliding bridge associated with an eccentric pinion reproduced the moon's speed variation, making the correspondence of lunar phases more precise than a simple uniform movement. Planetary retrogradation involved additional epicycles or gears for certain planets, such as Venus or Mercury. Some fragments suggest that not all planets were perhaps included, or that the planetary device was not finalized. In any case, the Antikythera mechanism integrated the calculation of synodic, anomalistic, and draconic months. Its architecture, based on riveted axes and calibrated gears, relied on the knowledge of renowned astronomers. Lubrication with olive oil ensured the durability of the whole, designed to operate for many years and cover several eclipse cycles. If these innovations did not fully spread, it might be due to the lack of a broader public or effective means of dissemination. The use of the machine probably remained confined to an elite, but it remains a direct testimony of how natural philosophy, geometry, and craftsmanship intertwined in the late Hellenistic world to produce an extraordinary piece of engineering, materializing the geocentric model and linking the observation of stars with bronze kinematics. In 2005, a high-energy X-ray tomography campaign, led mainly by a British team, marked a decisive step in understanding what remained a cluster of corroded fragments. Thanks to a CT scan operating at 360 keV, researchers could virtually slice through the bronze layers and obtain 3D images of the inside of each fragment. This technique revealed the precise layout of the gears, their interlocking points, and inscriptions that were previously invisible or hidden under marine limestone concretions, offering for the first time a clear view of the arrangement of teeth and the mechanical path. An international consortium, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, comprising universities from Cardiff, Athens, and London, centralized these new data. Surface photometry enabled the detection of nearly erased letters and numbers, especially on the Politeia fragment, revealing encoded terms and indications that confirmed the device as a didactic and predictive astronomical calculator. The results, cross-referenced with the exact number of teeth on certain wheels, identified complex calendrical cycles and validated hypotheses formulated several decades earlier based on literary descriptions. From 2020, the use of artificial intelligence algorithms allowed researchers to go further. They submitted all accumulated information to AI models: high-resolution photographs, laser surveys, tomographic slices, and fragmentary transcriptions of the inscriptions. Neural networks reconstructed the original configuration of the gears, extrapolated the missing parts of the text, and proposed hypotheses about the internal layout of the casing. These efforts supported 3D mechanical reconstructions, enabling tests of the machine's function on computers and highlighting details like the complexity of the clutches responsible for lunar speed variation and the exact distribution of axes and indicator plates. The question of the geographical and intellectual origin of the Antikythera mechanism has long sparked debates in archaeology and the history of science. Several workshops are cited: the island of Rhodes, the city of Pergamon in Asia Minor, and Alexandria in Egypt. The arguments are based on epigraphic clues, the mechanical and astronomical tradition of each center, as well as the chronology of late Greek antiquity. The initial clues come from the inscriptions on the fragments of the mechanism. An Ionic alphabet can be distinguished, but certain stylistic peculiarities recall the Rhodian dialect. Phrases and accents typical of Rhodes are present. There are allusions to the Hellesian Games, celebrated in Rhodes in honor of Helios, the island's tutelary deity, suggesting that the machine may have been manufactured or calibrated by artisans participating in these events. The Rhodian hypothesis is reinforced by Rhodes' status as a center for astronomical and mechanical research at the end of the 2nd century before Christ. The city boasted a school combining Stoic philosophy and advanced geometry, fostering the creation of precise scientific objects. Rhodian blacksmiths and bronze workers, trained in the manufacturing of planetariums and astrolabes, could conceive such a complex mechanism as maritime navigation demanded a fine knowledge of lunar and solar cycles. Other specialists favor Pergamon, renowned for its library, and astronomers and celestial cartographers. The city had metallurgical workshops capable of crafting fine mechanical elements. The Attalid court encouraged innovation and funded the creation of astronomical instruments for the city's prestige and elite education. The machine could have been commissioned by a Pergamene patron and then transported to the Aegean world or a wealthy Roman client. The third hub is Alexandria, with its museum and library, bringing together researchers capable of designing automata, advanced clepsydras, and astronomical instruments. Alexandria fostered the blending of knowledge: Babylonian astronomy, Greek mathematics, Egyptian time measurement traditions, and mechanical techniques. The mechanism could be the result of this cultural mix, designed by an astronomer to physically materialize complex theoretical calculations. The dating largely relies on the work of the astronomer Hipparchus of Nicaea, active between 190 and 120 before Christ. He was one of the first to propose a method for calculating lunar parallax for more accurate measurement of celestial distances, which influenced the representation of lunar movement in the mechanism, notably the idea of a non-perfectly circular orbit with variable speeds. Since Hipparchus did not publish his works in a canonical manner until between 140 and 130 before Christ, it is unlikely that the machine was developed before this period. This invalidates the thesis that it could have come from Archimedes' workshop, who died in 212 before Christ, as he did not yet have Hipparchus's discoveries. Archimedes had designed armillary spheres or rudimentary planetariums, but the refined knowledge of lunar discrepancies seems to be attested only with Hipparchus, which explains the near-universal rejection of a direct link with the Syracusan workshop. Archimedes' role as a pioneer remains indisputable. His tradition of mechanics and engineering influenced the next generation of scholars. The techniques of gear cutting and assembly, calculating gear ratios, and the compact design of complex objects circulated in the Mediterranean basin, strengthened by contact with specialists from Alexandria, Pergamon, and Rhodes. Several technological currents intertwined then: Euclidean geometry, emerging trigonometry, the Babylonian legacy for eclipse prediction, combined with Greek artisanal skills for bronze casting and cutting. The most plausible scenario suggests a Rhodian origin, nonetheless incorporating elements from other intellectual centers. High-skilled craftsmen would have adapted Hipparchus's new astral findings to the practical construction of a calculating instrument and inscribed instructions on the case to facilitate its use, adding cultural and sports references like those to the Hellenistic Games. The whole, thus, results from multiple influences, reflecting the vitality and interconnectedness of the great Hellenistic scientific centers. The Rhodian hypothesis remains the most cited, pending potential archaeological or epigraphic discoveries that might confirm, nuance, or overturn this understanding of its origins. The reconstructed fragments of the Antikythera mechanism suggested interested various categories of people in the late Hellenistic world and early Roman times. Firstly, a navigator, responsible for crossings between the Aegean islands, could use it to refine his positional calculations and predict eclipses or astronomical alignments. Mariners sought to assess the favorable interval for departures, anticipate night navigation, or align their calendar with important festivities. The moon often served as a reference, and such a mechanism allowed correlation of constellations, the solar course, and lunar phases. The precision of the device made it a prestige tool for a captain or ship owner despite harsh sea conditions, and exhibiting or consulting the machine testified to knowledge beyond the reach of most sailors. Furthermore, the astrologer-mathematician constitutes another probable user profile. In late Greece and the Roman sphere, scholars capable of calculating eclipses and stellar positions were highly respected. Study centers like Rhodes, Alexandria, or Pergamon trained specialists able to predict celestial bodies and explain heavenly phenomena to the elites. The Antikythera mechanism served as a concrete extension of their treatises. Gears aligned with lunar and solar cycles allowed demonstration of the celestial vault's regular operation in front of students or patrons. It mechanically translated what usually required extensive astronomical tables and bolstered the astrologer-mathematician's credibility. We can imagine public or semi-private demonstrations where the scholar manipulated the gears to comment on eclipses or solstices. The third profile, the wealthy Roman collector, fits into a trend in the 1st century before Christ, where the Roman elite was passionate about Greek luxury items. Rome, victorious in numerous campaigns, sought after works of art, manuscripts, and exotic artifacts. Owning an Antikythera mechanism, rare and almost magical, offered prestige and admiration during symposiums. The purchase and importation of Greek engineering objects highlighted the refinement, financial power, and intellectual curiosity of aristocrats. The machine nourished both ancient knowledge and the pride of having an artifact accessible to very few people. These three groups fit into a context where astronomy and fine mechanics remained the preserve of restricted circles. Few sailors could afford such a costly and complex object, assembled by elite craftsmen. It required a specialized workshop, probably close to philosophical schools. The machine was commissioned by patrons or sovereigns rather than sold on a public market. Rhodian or Alexandrian blacksmiths, known for their automata and globes, collaborated with an astronomer to align the teeth and axes. This high-level craftsmanship favored the rarity and preciousness of the machine, symbolized by its fortuitous discovery in a shipwreck. The reasons for investing in such a machine went beyond navigation. By displaying different scales of sidereal, solar, and lunar time and anticipating eclipses, it allowed fixing of ritual, civic, or religious dates. In the Greek world, major festivals at Delphi, Olympia, or other cities were modeled on sacred astral phases. Predicting the full moon allowed synchronization of processions, organizing maritime journeys of pilgrims or merchants, and limiting untimely departures. The Antikythera mechanism thus fulfilled a dual role: practical with its calculative aspect, symbolic through its inscription in a cosmology shared by the Greeks and some Romans keen on Hellenism. For the astrologer-mathematician, the pedagogical function was clear. The late antiquity and Hellenistic period saw the flourishing of philosophical schools and libraries, cataloging star catalogs, lists of eclipses, and trigonometric formulas. In this context, owning a machine capable of simulating the irregular movement of the moon, or the Metonic calendar cycles, 19 years, was an asset. Students could observe the mechanical representation of what they saw in the sky directly and experiment the transition from theory to gears. The abstract lesson became visual and reinforced the master's authority. Users mastering the device benefited from a superior intellectual status and could support pointed astronomical positions, such as the eccentricity of the lunar orbit, or the difference between a synodic month of 29.53 days and a solar year. Stoics saw it as the materialization of a cosmos governed by the logos. Each celestial movement followed a rational plan, illustrating an orderly universe. For wealthy Romans seeking cultural recognition, this Stoic vision presented an intellectual and political attraction. In Rome, science was valued less than civic or military virtues, but supporting Greek research brought prestige. Owning a replica of the Antikythera mechanism signaled belonging to the cultivated elite, interested in geography, astronomy, and natural history. In lavish dinners, a slave or philosopher could manipulate the device, explain the inclination of the Earth's axis, or comment on an upcoming eclipse, thus ennobling the host and partially spreading Stoicism and Greek cosmology. In a pedagogical demonstration inspired by Stoicism, the cosmos horologion served as a common thread. The image of a cosmos similar to a clock, governed by the synchronicity of its parts, illustrated universal reason and cosmic necessity. Seeing a bronze box reproduce these laws conferred admiration and reverence. Through mathematics and technique, humans could approach divine thought and reproduce on a small scale the harmony of the spheres. The machine was therefore not just a calculator, it served as a bridge between pure thought and sublunar reality, showing that human intelligence could penetrate the methodical organization of the universe. The use of the Antikythera mechanism, anchored in Stoic philosophy, had a spiritual dimension. Observers saw it as a means to conform to cosmic reason and accept that everything follows an unalterable order. By turning the crank, one followed the sequence of seasons, eclipses, or planetary conjunctions as stages of a celestial program. For the educated elite, promoting this vision of a regulated universe reinforced the cohesion of the scholarly society and the power of those who understood these phenomena. An astrologer-mathematician, capable of predicting a solar eclipse, could derive a discourse on destiny, providence, or the influence of stars on human affairs. The quasi-magical role of the machine inspired respect and fear in a world where numerous aspects of political or military life were attributed to the stars. The dimension of prestige was added to these explanations, showing mastery over time, and the skies highlighted a unique status. Notables preserved their rank through patronage, temples, cities, theaters, services of craftsmen or intellectuals. Owning and presenting the Antikythera mechanism allowed one to participate in scholarly discussions and reinforce authority. Visitors, fascinated by the complexity of the object, acknowledged the cultural superiority of the owner. Since the end of the 2nd century before Christ, Rome appropriated Greek arts and sciences to enrich its heritage and glorify the conqueror. Banquets could include a demonstration moment. The speaker presented the machine and explained how it predicted the return of a lunar cycle, proving the knowledge and taste of the master of the place. Sources mentioning the possession of planetariums or armillary spheres show that this tradition was not limited to a few prototypes. By combining testimonies and archaeological remains, one can envision a discrete but real circulation of these instruments, concentrated in Rhodes, Alexandria, Pergamon, or Antioch, centers of demand for rare and educational objects. Scholars sometimes carried reduced globes or simplified instruments. An itinerant astrologer in Rome could present his most spectacular pieces to showcase his skills. The Antikythera mechanism, in its advanced configuration, illustrates the culmination of a technology meant to represent and calculate while remaining reserved for a minority. On the educational level, this minority capitalized on the surprise effect of the regular movement of the gears. Even though many observed the sky, few could model these observations. Seeing the dial animate with the lunar cycle, the Egyptian calendar, or the great Pan-Hellenic games was equivalent to a condensed lesson in cosmography. The teacher used the device to immerse the audience in an integrated vision of time, unifying myths, religious festivals, and scientific measurement. The public became aware of the precision needed to represent celestial movement, reinforcing the belief in a world governed by calculable laws. Mastering the machine gave a psychological advantage. The astrologer could advise leaders on the best time to launch a campaign or celebrate a public act, and the patron appropriated the prestige of knowledge. Stoicism was not the only school interested in astronomy. Epicureans sought rational explanations for celestial phenomena without invoking divine purpose. In most Hellenistic cities, Stoicism offered a framework connecting every cosmic event to a universal destiny. The concept of cosmos horologion combined religious and political concerns. Some sanctuaries possessed such mechanisms or invited specialists for demonstrations, affirming their control over the understanding of celestial signs and the will of the gods. Offerings linked to the accuracy of predictions reinforced the power of the cult and rewarded the expertise of the astrologer-mathematician. Artisans could also design derivative pieces to adorn an altar or honor the perfection of the universe. The idea of sacred time, marked by the phases of the moon or solstices, complemented the purely astronomical dimension. In Roman mentality, the beauty of the object joined the quest for exoticism and rarity. Rich patrician villas were home to Greek paintings, mosaics, musical instruments, and jewelry. A complex machine served to accumulate a cultural treasure. Even without fully knowing how to use it, the mere act of displaying it impressed visitors. Greek engineering offered a mirror of mastery of the universe. Owning the machine meant capturing a fragment of that intelligence. Cicero mentions Archimedes' sphere and other devices, signs that wonder benefited the engineer as much as the collector. Some great Roman lords brought these pieces back from Greece after a triumph to install them in their homes, showing that Rome seized territories while integrating their science and expertise. The presence of such a machine enhanced the status of a city or a sanctuary. Pilgrimage sites could exhibit these instruments to attract travelers and diplomats. The Pan-Hellenic Games, which the Antikythera mechanism mentions the cycles of, could benefit from a ceremonial use, announcing competitions, synchronizing the sacred calendar, informing official delegations. In Rhodes or Alexandria, these demonstrations illustrated Greek mastery inherited from Babylon and Euclid, while strengthening political alliances. Respecting the right timing meant respecting the order of the universe. Finally, the symbolic value of the Antikythera mechanism lay in the perception people had of it. Most contemporaries were unaware of its functioning and saw it as a technological miracle or a divine object. This sacralization of science reinforced the power of those who held the key. Navigators, astrologers, or collectors benefited from the mythical aura of the device. At the margins of the Hellenistic world, the reputation of these machines to predict the sky circulated in the form of exaggerated stories, increasing the fascination and demand for this type of treasure. In this game of influences, one perceives the intertwining of the end of the Hellenistic era and the beginning of the Romanization of the Mediterranean. The machine was involved as much in a practical context, for the sailor calculating the best day to leave the port, as in a cultural and philosophical one, for the Stoic valuing an ordered universe, not to mention collectors seeking distinction. An artifact at the crossroads of cosmology, luxury craftsmanship, and erudition, it materialized one of the most accomplished facets of ancient science. Astrologers and philosophers could elevate their discourse and assert their credibility, The navigator saw it as a support for his calculations, while the wealthy Roman displayed his superiority and his taste for Greek culture. The machine was thus part of a network of exchanges linking practitioners, theorists, and passionate aristocrats. According to Stoic philosophy, the regular movement of celestial spheres illustrated the cycle of nature. Owning a device translating this cycle into metallic gears constituted a symbolic gesture, like holding a part of the cosmic mystery. Clients sought knowledge, the beauty of the mechanism, and the assurance of being in tune with the divine order. If this strengthened their social position or authority, it was an additional advantage. While not widespread, the machine attracted buyers from the maritime domain, the intellectual sphere, and the aristocracy. The fascination for the cosmos horologion reflected the idea of a universe like a clock, knowing the springs of which allowed one to predict its evolution. The Stoics connected astronomical observation with ethical reflection on man's place. Handling the machine was taming time, integrating lunar and solar cycles, embracing the perspective of the zodiac. The inscriptions recalled the pan-Hellenic festivals, the Egyptian months, and the planetary revolutions, weaving a link between concrete science and everyday life. Sailors, astrologers, and Romans thus recognized the practical and philosophical value of the object. This set of motivations illustrates the multiplicity of uses, oscillating between pragmatism and symbolism. The rare holders could guide ships as well as minds. Like the cosmos, both technical and spiritual, the Antikythera mechanism symbolized the boundary between mathematical practice, ancient esotericism, and ostentatious power. Beyond the famous Antikythera mechanism, the ancient world had various devices intended to illustrate, reproduce, or calculate the movements of celestial bodies. Among them, the planetaria mechanically or visually showed the trajectories of the moon, the sun, and sometimes the planets around the Earth, according to the geocentric view. Their construction required a refined expertise, blending astronomy, mathematics, metallurgy, and craftsmanship, mastered by few specialists. This technological heritage has come down to us in a fragmentary manner through literary accounts and a few damaged archaeological pieces, giving a glimpse of a vast but little-known tradition. Cicero, a Roman orator and philosopher, born in 106 before Christ and died in 43. Before Christ mentions in De Republica a device called spheros, sphere, attributed to Archimedes of Syracuse, active in the 3rd century before Christ. Archimedes, famous for his work in geometry, hydrostatics, and mechanics, is said to have made a mechanical globe or improved our Miller sphere to demonstrate celestial movements. Cicero reports having seen it in Rome after Marcus Claudius Marcellus brought back Archimedes' possessions during the capture of Syracuse in 212 before Christ. The spheros displayed the Earth, the firmament, the phases of the moon, and the position of the planets known at the time: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, though the degree of precision remains unknown. Cicero's testimony suggests that the spheros simulated complex astronomical phenomena, synchronizing the moon's movement with that of the sun to reproduce the lunar phases and schematizing certain apparent irregularities with internal gears. Although these details are mostly modern reconstructions, Cicero confirms the theoretical existence of such mechanisms. Other scientifically influential cities like Alexandria, Pergamon, or Rhodes probably saw astronomers and engineers trying to build their own spheres for demonstrative or educational use. Another thinker often associated with planetaria is Posidonius of Apamea. born around 135 before Christ and died around 51 before Christ. A Stoic philosopher of the late Hellenistic period, he lived on the island of Rhodes, where he studied astronomy, geography, and physics. His influence extended to Rome, admired by Cicero and other Latin authors. Posidonius is said to have developed an animated globe capable of showing celestial rotation and the positions of astronomical bodies. The exact nature of this globe remains uncertain, geocentric like an armillary sphere or equipped with gear wheels to more finely reproduce speeds and retrogradations in the manner of the Antikythera mechanism. Whatever the case, his reputation confirms that observational and calculation machines could have circulated between intellectual centers, probably in unique or very limited copies. Archaeologically, ancient planetaria are difficult to study. Unlike the Antikythera mechanism, whose wreck preserved fragments, many artifacts disappeared during conflicts, looting, or shipwrecks. The mechanisms, made of bronze or iron, were often melted down for other uses. Specialists therefore rely on mentions in texts, inscriptions indicating the construction of a group of spheres, or on gear fragments that do not seem to belong to utilitarian machines. In Olbia, a Greek colony on the northern coast of the Black Sea, several toothed bronze fragments have been discovered, but their function remains uncertain. In Heraclea Pontica, a prosperous Greek city on the southern coast of the Black Sea, 19th century excavations unearthed bronze alloy fragments whose teeth seem compatible with a use in astronomical clockmaking rather than utilitarian mechanics. Without complete devices or precise contexts, it is difficult to conclude. Nonetheless, these fragments suggest that the Antikythera mechanism was not isolated, but represented a series of similar instruments. Based on this, some historians suggest that the Mediterranean world and certain regions close to the east developed a tradition of mechanical planetariums. The intellectual rise of cities like Alexandria or Rhodes and the presence of engineers combining mathematics and metallurgy suggest the existence of cumulative knowledge transmitted through scholarly circles, libraries, and royal or aristocratic patronage, particularly between the 3rd and 1st centuries before Christ. Kings, generals, and wealthy Roman patricians appreciated these artifacts, which demonstrated their cultural refinement and interest in astronomy related to astrology. The machines reproducing the movements of the sky, whether called planetaria, spheres, spheros, or animated globes, were not only technical objects, but also symbols of mastery over time, destiny, and the divine mechanisms of the universe. It is not excluded that such mechanical marvels circulated as diplomatic gifts, or were commissioned by sanctuaries for public demonstrations. Certain religious ceremonies, where the position of the moon or sun needed to be observed, benefited from precise devices to determine the auspicious moments for offerings or auguries. In some philosophical schools, like the Stoics or Platonists, the demonstration of a rotating geocentric model or gears simulating planetary conjunctions served as a pedagogical tool to help students grasp the complexity of the celestial vault. The writings of Posidonius, preserved only fragmentarily, show that astronomical research relied on observations, notably from Rhodes, and on mechanical devices to refine or illustrate calculations. The use of these instruments remained limited to small learned circles. This multiplicity of devices probably declined due to the political and military upheavals at the end of the Roman Republic and the Empire. Few scholars continued their interest in these instruments in private courses or epistolary exchanges, as with Ptolemy in the 2nd century Anno Domini, but mass production of civilian planetaria never developed. Their high cost and the necessity of strong justification limited their distribution. Some examples served as diplomatic gifts, to emperors or client kings of Rome, while most disappeared or were dismantled to recover the bronze. From the 3rd century Anno Domini, the Mediterranean was shaken by invasions, civil wars, plague, and economic instabilities, transforming or dissolving many networks of scientific production and transmission. The 4th century saw the emergence of Christianity as the dominant religion, leading to the shift of intellectual centers from great pagan cities to bishoprics and monasteries. Ancient libraries, such as the one in Alexandria, were already struggling to preserve treatises on mechanics and astronomy, and priority was given to theological, juridical, or liturgical texts. The late antique crisis, marked by the fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century Anno Domini, sealed the fate of many technical traditions. The royal workshops in Ptolemaic Egypt, Asia Minor, or Roman Italy lost the support of classical patrons. Artisans specialized in making gears for astronomical simulation found themselves without outlets, while the empire prioritized fortifications, weapons, and vital infrastructures like aqueducts. Some knowledge survived through late texts citing Greek scholars or through partial copies of Ptolemy's works, but the context of insecurity and the remoteness from major cultural centers gradually marginalized mechanical observational astronomy. The few machines that might have survived were thin or damaged, and the bronze was often melted down or recycled. The inscriptions on casings and dials, crucial for understanding their functioning, could be erased or wear down over time. The theoretical knowledge required to verify, adjust, or repair these machines was preserved in treatises demanding a high level of education, which the elites gradually stopped promoting. Only references in texts remained, like those of Cicero or other late Latin authors, praising Greek ingenuity without perpetuating the practice. This phenomenon is also observed in bronze statuary, precision cartography, or sophisticated urban planning. Some indications show that the tradition of planetaria did not completely die out until the dawn of the Middle Ages. In the Byzantine world, in Constantinople, the learned culture and technical knowledge inherited from ancient Greece persisted. Scholars copied or commented on ancient authors, including on astronomy. It is sometimes reported that hydraulic mechanisms or automata were present in certain churches or imperial palaces, showing that the principles of gears remained partially alive. However, there is no evidence that a true planetarium was still functioning. The advances in metallurgy and the lack of patrons open to speculative research limited the production of astronomical instruments. Mechanical astronomy would later resume in medieval Europe with tower clocks and the rise of the Islamic, then Latin, astrolabe. The fate of ancient planetaria shows the existence of a diffuse technological knowledge spread across various workshops and philosophical circles. This knowledge, linking theoretical astronomy and practical skills of bronze workers and blacksmiths, involved a fine understanding of transmission ratios, celestial cycles, and material constraints. Thanks to passionate patrons or scholars, this reservoir of techniques would blossom, then fall into dormancy when there was no longer any succession or audience. References to Archimedes and Posidonius reveal only the tip of an iceberg. Other scholars may have enriched astronomical mechanics, creating devices of which we only have rare traces. The gears discovered at Olbia and the bronze fragments at Heraclea Pontica suggest a regular production of devices similar to planetaria, intended for instruction, demonstration, or technical functions like predicting eclipses or calculating ship departures according to tides and lunar phases. It is possible that itinerant artisans, passionate about mathematics, were trained by scholars and transmitted their knowledge from city to city, but this hypothesis can only be confirmed with more examples or inscriptions. The late antique crisis led to the gradual disappearance of these traditions by breaking trade routes, making metals scarce, and dispersing intellectual elites toward administrative or military occupations. Dedications, or official praises, accompanying the construction of planetaria became rarer. Patristic texts and conciliar acts offer almost no clues on the existence of sophisticated astronomical instruments, a sign that they were no longer a priority nor admired. Some pieces may have been preserved in private collections for a few more generations before corrosion, melting, or the forgetting of their functioning ended their use. The little-known tradition of planetaria reflects the hidden side of ancient ingenuity. While the Antikythera machine remains the major example, other mechanical models surely existed. The Sphyros of Archimedes and the animated globe of Posidonius testify to concrete projects conceived by the most brilliant minds of their time. Partial discoveries, like bronze gears at Olbia or fragments at Heraclea Pontica, suggest a wider geographical diffusion. The transition to late antiquity, marked by political crises, religious reforms, and cultural changes, contributed to the oblivion of this scientific legacy, taking with it these feats of celestial mechanics that remain today one of the great mysteries in the history of science. When observing the Antikythera machine and its finesse, it is astonishing to note that its principle did not find massive resonance in late antiquity or subsequent centuries. The reasons are multiple and relate to the nature of materials and the economic and cultural structures of the Mediterranean world under Roman domination. Bronze, a precious resource resulting from the fusion of copper and tin, was sometimes difficult to obtain in significant quantities, and its price fluctuated according to conflicts and the availability of deposits. The high cost of the devices and the rarity of trained artisans drastically limited their diffusion. The fabrication of complex gears demanded a high level of specialization. Artisans capable of cutting, adjusting, and assembling precise toothed wheels and planning each axis of rotation were very rare. The mechanikoi, engineers inheriting the tradition of Archimedes and Alexandria, formed a discrete circle attached to the court or wealthy patrons. Without schools or guilds to transmit these skills, the disappearance of an engineer could lead to the irreversible loss of his techniques. The absence of the printing press also played a role. From the first millennium before Christ until late antiquity, transmission was primarily through practical learning from master to student. Technical treatises, handwritten and copied, limited dissemination. Designing mechanisms like the Antikythera machine required both theory and practice, tests, corrections, and precise adjustments, which slowed the spread of these skills. Finally, the evolution of priorities under Romanization was crucial. From the 2nd century before Christ, Rome consolidated its conquests and focused on essential infrastructures: roads, bridges, aqueducts, drainage systems, military fortifications. Complex mechanical inventions centered on astronomy and the calculation of cosmic cycles had limited practical application in an empire concerned with logistics and military organization. A few patrons might have taken an interest, but their passion was not enough to ensure sustained production. From an economic point of view, the fact that such a sophisticated device was not directly profitable hindered its spread. Roman elites appreciated luxury objects, but valued those more that demonstrated immediate and comprehensible social status: goldsmith pieces, silver vases, mosaics, or bronze statues. An astronomical mechanism, however impressive, remained relatively obscure outside the circle of philosophers and engineers. Without a real market or massive demand, its production remained confidential. The political fragmentation after the Roman civil wars also dispersed specialized workshops. Border conflicts, army financing, and political instability discouraged investment in applied astronomy. Over the years, major intellectual centers declined, and the mechanical tradition inherited from the Hellenistic world concentrated in a few preserved places. The transmission of knowledge depended on the fate of libraries, sometimes victims of fires or looting, as at Alexandria or Pergamon. Manuscripts on papyrus, fragile, wore out, or were lost forever. The integration of Greek science into Roman culture was not homogeneous. In medicine, architecture, or military engineering, the Greek contribution was substantial. But high-precision astronomical calculation, cultivated by a few scholars, did not benefit from wide state support. This disparity explains why the works of Archimedes or Heron of Alexandria were partially translated, compiled, or altered, and why expertise in gears did not survive in a form ready to spread massively. The Antikythera machine embodies the pinnacle of advanced mechanical knowledge, born in the context of Hellenistic city-states eager for scientific achievements and innovations. Once this context dissolved into the Roman Empire, utilitarian logic took precedence over the quest for complex mechanics for educational or astronomical purposes. The fragile infrastructures for knowledge transmission, the absence of strong political support, and the scarcity of resources led this technological potential to fade into oblivion. Without explicit intent of destruction, it simply didn't find a favorable ground for its flourishing. Despite its oblivion for nearly 2 millennia, the Antikythera machine reappeared at the beginning of the 20th century with its excavation in the wreck discovered in 1901. The first researchers, archaeologists, and historians of Greek art took an interest in this mass of corroded bronze. Radiographic techniques gradually allowed distinguishing the internal gears and revealing the device's complexity, marking the start of a quest to understand its exact function. As early as 1959, the historian of science Derek de Solla Price published Gears from the Greeks, a decisive step in the awareness of the mechanism's sophistication. Price proposed a reconstruction based on the radiographic surveys of the time, attracting international attention to this artifact, often dubbed the first analog computer. Debates then began among historians, mathematicians, and astronomers about its ability to represent the phases of the moon, calculate eclipse dates, or predict planetary cycles. The National Archaeological Museum of Athens preserves the pieces and organizes several exhibitions. The public discovers this treasure from a time when such precise gears were unimaginable. Over the decades, various researchers and engineers have reproduced the device, notably Derek de Solla Price in 1974, followed by other teams in Europe and the United States, following the results of scientific analyses. In the 2000s, the BB4 Christ produced several documentaries. High-energy tomography conducted by the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project revealed inscriptions engraved in the case, astronomical indications, multiple calendars, and references to the Pan-Hellenic Games. The machine also inspires popular culture, appearing in historical novels, films, and video games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Beyond public interest, the machine generates educational interest. 3D printing kits allow the reproduction of all or part of the mechanism in makerspaces and digital workshops. STEM students thus learn ancient geometry, gear modeling, and basic astronomy, while teachers illustrate the apparent movements of celestial bodies and the evolution of mechanics through the centuries. Current debates focus on the possible inclusion of the 5 planets then known: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Ptolemy's geocentric model, which came after the machine, included their retrogradations, but there are still uncertainties about the precision achievable in the 2nd or 1st century before Christ. The internal fragments of the mechanism, named wheels B and C, contain partially erased markings. Some distinguish gears for the planets, others estimate they only concern the Moon and the Sun. Another sticking point concerns the composition of the bronze and the technique used to cast and cut the gears. The conservators of the National Archaeological Museum of Athens currently refuse any massive sampling of the pieces in order to avoid damaging them. Several microcoring projects are planned starting in 2026 to analyze in laboratory the metallurgical signature of certain gears. These tiny samples could allow for a more precise dating of the mechanism and determine if its components came from a single workshop or from several bronze supply sources. Regarding the inscriptions, new artificial intelligence algorithms developed since 2020 attempt to reconstruct the erased or damaged parts. Thanks to high-precision photogrammetry and machine learning, it is hoped to recover text fragments, possibly indicating a donation from a king, the name of the principal craftsman, or a reference to Rhodes, Pergamum, or Alexandria. If new keywords were discovered, this could settle a debate several decades old. Is it a strictly Rhodian work, influenced by Hipparchus, or a collective creation of several intellectual centers? The Antikythera wreck is still the subject of underwater research, as part of the cargo may not have been explored. New diving campaigns conducted from 2022 to 2025 at depths of over 100 meters involve professional divers and submersible robots to map the seabed. The hope is to find other fragments of the mechanism, missing gear wheels, case parts, or inscriptions on unidentified bronze plates. Such a discovery could challenge certain hypotheses and offer a more complete view of the astronomical device. The broader perspective that emerges touches on the transmission of knowledge and the valorization of technological progress by civilizations. The study of the Antikythera mechanism reveals a rare and fragile combination: a favorable scientific moment, enlightened patronage, exceptional craftsmen, and a purpose-blending philosophical cosmology and navigation tools. The work on the wreck continues, as does the analysis of the slightest bronze pieces, to better understand the place of this celestial calculator for its designers and users, whether they be sailors, astronomers, or sponsors in search of prestige. International collaborations bringing together engineers, experts in the history of science, curators, and underwater archaeologists are leveraging 21st century technological advancements to unlock the secrets of the mechanism. Submersible robots, digital tomography, and AI are opening new avenues, while public fascination with this relic of an almost forgotten scientific past remains undiminished. Debates continue on the exact number of gears, the precise astronomical scope, and its educational or divinatory function. The Antikythera machine continues to push the boundaries of our knowledge and remains one of the most moving testaments to human ingenuity at the threshold of the Roman Empire period.